My name's Ken Parker. I'm on the Lighter Footprints Committee, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. And I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Isn't it great to be here today amongst other passionate people of integrity? Well, yes, you are people of integrity because you have the concern to do something and be involved in doing what is right, what is needed to be done. And you're passionate because you've taken the effort to come here tonight. And I know many of you do that time after time to Lighter Footprints and many other meetings and events. And our government, I think, is catching up. I think finally we're actually going to have some action for integrity and to get rid of corruption as much as we can. Isn't that fantastic? But tonight we're looking at forests and gas. Now, gas was in the news today. Did you notice that there's some holes? 3 different holes in the gas pipelines, the Nord pipelines between Russia and Europe. So gas is subject to a lot of problems, and you'll hear a lot more about that tonight. And forests. Did you know that the Amazon rainforest has reached a crucial tipping point? About 26% of the Amazon rainforest has already been lost or badly degraded, and without intervention, the rest could transform into savanna, the loss of a vital resource and terrible for climate change. But all is not lost. Another thing which is on the positive side is that Guatemala's rainforest is expanding thanks to community efforts. The forests of the Maya Biosphere Reserve are growing rather than shrinking because of a community-led conservation campaign. Anyway, I'm not here to give you those details. We've got wonderful speakers to tell you about that. And I'd now like to introduce them to you. Chris Schuringa is the Victorian Forest Alliance campaign coordinator. Chris has been volunteering and working in the forest movement for nearly 5 years, and she's passionate about community organising, grassroots campaigning, and getting out into the forests. She's volunteered and worked for a number of different groups from across Victoria, campaigning for the protection of native forests from logging. And you'll hear more from Chris. You'll hear from Chris very shortly. And I'll introduce our second speaker now to save interrupting later. We're very pleased to also have Freja Leonard from Friends of the Earth. Freja is a gas campaigner for Friends of the Earth Melbourne and Lock the Gate Alliance. She has over 15 years' experience in a range of portfolios, including climate, energy, and waste, both within the state parliamentary offices as well as in the not-for-profit sector. Prior to this, she worked in corporate environmental management for small and large businesses. Over the last 2.5 years, she has coordinated with local governments in Victoria and New South Wales to decarbonise gas at a municipal level. She drafted a community response to the shortfalls of the Victorian gas substitution roadmap. So as you can tell, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be in very good hands as we hear from our 2 experts tonight. So please give a great welcome to Chris Schuringa.
Thank you so much, Ken, and thanks everyone for the really warm welcome. It's really, really lovely, and for putting on this event tonight. So important that we all gather to talk about these 2 really important issues, the challenges that we face and what we can do about it. Again, my name is Chris Schuringa. I work for the Victorian Forest Alliance. And I want to start just by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. 60,000 years of custodianship and ongoing care of country against immense hardship and ongoing genocide and colonial nature of what is so-called Australia. And I really just want to pay my deepest respects to elders, past and present, and any First Nations people here tonight. I want to start with a story from me and how I got involved in the Native Forests campaign. When I was in my early 20s, I dropped out of university and was having a bit of a life crisis. And as you do when you're in your early 20s and you're trying to find yourself, I did a lot of traveling in Tasmania, and I did a 6-month hitchhiking journey around Tasmania, and I walked and experienced these really incredible forests that Tasmania has for the first time. Towering trees, moss growing on everything, and just really feeling so in awe about what I was experiencing. And when you're hitchhiking, you have this really incredible experience where you meet and talk with people in a very intimate way. You're stuck in a car with someone and you have no choice but to chat with them for hours and hours. And that really leads to beautiful conversations, and you meet people. And I met people on this journey who were involved in conservation, were involved in fighting for forests. And I started to learn and see the challenges that were being faced and the threats to these forests. And so when I returned home, I wanted to bring what I had experienced there back to Victoria and try and find my community and find people who were really doing that fight, because it had inspired me so much. And so I ended up going to a creative direct action workshop, and I met this woman, Kath, who is actually here tonight. And she convinced me to go to a meeting where a bunch of forest groups from across Victoria were gathering to campaign and work on this issue and to protect native forests. That was more than 5 years ago, and I haven't looked back. I now work for the Victorian Forest Alliance. I have the privilege to work with the Alliance, which brings more than 30 groups together actively campaigning for native forests in Victoria. And really, it's, even though the group and the Alliance is quite new, it's an existing membership of people who have a long legacy of fighting for forests in Victoria. So it's really exciting. So tonight, really what I'd like to share with you is what hooked me in to this forest campaign, and hopefully hook you all in as well. So when we're talking about forests, we're talking about stolen First Nations country. And as you can see here, there are so many First Nations that exist across Victoria. And a lot of the country that I'm talking about is Taungurung country, Wurundjeri country, Jab Wurrung country, Dja Dja Wurrung country, Gunai Kurnai country, Bidwell country, so many nations and so many people who have been displaced, but are still existing in these communities and fighting for land rights and justice. So here's a little snapshot of Melbourne. And again, the areas that I'm talking about are east of Melbourne here. You can see there's a lot of forest areas there, and also in patches in the west. So close to Melbourne, these forests and these incredible areas that we have access to. So these are two really typical forest types that you'll see in Victoria. On the left is towering mountain ash forests of the Central Highlands. Mountain ash trees, or Eucalyptus regnans, are the world's tallest flowering plant, and they provide critical habitat for threatened species. They're often found in wet gullies. They need wet and cool conditions in order to thrive. So that's in Warburton. And sorry that my voice is like going in and out the volume, because I like to turn to the slides and point, and so apologies. I hope you can all hear me properly. On the right is kind of mixed species forest, which is really common across eastern Victoria. This photo was taken in East Gippsland, which is particularly known for its biodiversity, heaps of different kinds of forest types like cool temperate rainforest, warm temperate rainforest, and yeah, just really rich in different plants and animal species which are threatened. So why are these forests so important? Victoria's native forests are some of the world's best ecosystems for storing carbon. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. They filter Melbourne's drinking water. They're culturally significant to First Nations people. They hold their culture, their stories, and animal totems. They provide habitat for wildlife and biodiversity, and they're also really important for regional economies and local jobs and conservation jobs. So here are some of the animals that you might see in Victoria's native forests. Up the top there on the left, that's the sooty owl. On the right here, powerful owl. Both of these are threatened and endangered. On the bottom left, it's a shame that photo isn't a bit bigger because it's really an icon of the forest. It's the endangered greater glider. And in the center there is leadbeater's possum, which is critically endangered in Victoria, only found in Victoria. And it's actually our faunal emblem. And the Wurundjeri word for leadbeater's possum is woolert. So the thing that these animals all have in common is that they rely on native forests to survive. And they all rely on mature hollow-bearing trees, and hollow-bearing trees can take up to 120 years to develop. So they're a long time in the making. Again, the labels are terrible. I will explain them if you can't see. On the left is a graph just depicting how important these areas are for carbon storage. So the Central Highlands of Victoria, those mountain ash forests, which are on our doorstep, they store 1,800 tons of carbon per hectare. And if you compare that to other kinds of forests, it's absolutely, it's massive. And this is what makes our forests globally significant, and particularly for fighting climate change. On the right is a map showing the distribution of carbon and the level of carbon across southeastern Australia and in Tasmania. And it's hard to see, but the darker the area is, the more significant it is and the more carbon is stored. And the Central Highlands of Victoria is one of the most significant areas. So sadly, every year, thousands of hectares of forest, about 4 mcgs a day, are logged every day by the Victorian state government. And the logging is conducted by a state-owned logging company called VicForests. So what it is it's industrial clear fell logging on a massive scale that has decimated huge swathes of forest over the last 4 decades. So after an area of forest is logged, they then use a napalm-like substance to burn the remaining area, releasing tons and tons of toxic smoke and stored carbon into the atmosphere. This is a pretty typical image of a clear fell. So it's something that you never get used to seeing something like this. I've been in these clear fells many, many times before, and it never gets less shocking. You never get desensitized to it. So this is just to illustrate the scale and intensity of logging over a very short amount of time. This is the Rubicon State Forest area, and you can see basically an entire hillside has been completely scalped. This is an area in Matlock. So you can see in just 3 years, whole areas are just being completely cleared. So sadly, we hold some of the worst records on a global scale of species extinction in Australia, and Victoria is the hotspot. So we hold a very shocking record of species destruction. This is a map just showing, it's really hard to kind of see the scale and understand, but the red areas, which you can't see super clearly, they're areas that are currently scheduled for logging, and the orange are areas that have been logged in the past. And so you can see across the state how intense this logging has been over the last 40 years. And I don't want to go on like a destruction tour of Victoria, but if you zoomed into these areas, you can see that whole areas are really being completely decimated. So the first thing I asked myself when I first saw a clear fell, naturally, was why is this happening? Where do the trees go? So around 60% of the biomass is left on site, and then it's burnt in those post-logging burns that you saw earlier. Of what is removed, over 85% is going to wood chips for cardboard and paper products, which end up in landfill. The other 10% is going to pallet production. So for supermarkets that for distributing supermarket goods. There are two major mills in Victoria and they manufacture around 800,000 pallets a year. And then the very smallest percentage, around 4%, ends up as high grade timber products like flooring, decking and screening and some structural timber. There should be a piece of paper and a pen under your seat. We're going to do a Q&A at the end. So no, that's fine. That's fine. I can't, yeah. No worries. So the story gets worse. Sorry. Sorry. I apologize. Not only is the industry itself incredibly destructive and wasteful, but it's heavily subsidized by us as the taxpayer. So in 2021, VicForests reported an annual loss of around $20 million. And because it's a government-owned business, Tim Pallas, the Victorian Treasurer, is the sole shareholder. And it's so interesting because, well, it's not interesting, but maybe you'll find this interesting. There is a very low public support for native forest logging, even in regional communities. So there was a leaked poll that was conducted by a logging industry body that found that native forest logging was considered unacceptable by 83% of rural and regional residents and 90% of urban residents across Australia. So there's zero public support for this to continue. So the next question that I often get asked is, can our current demands for paper, pulp, cardboard and timber products be met with alternatives to native forests? And the answer is absolutely yes. Currently, the Maryvale paper mill, which is owned by Nippon paper, operates on around a 60-40 ratio of plantation and native forests. That's where a lot of the wood chips are going. So the 40% that comes from native forests could easily be met with existing plantation supplies, which we export overseas. For the very small percentage of hardwood saw logs needed, there are hardwood plantations, as well as other alternative sources through initiatives like farm forestry, which can easily meet these needs. We don't build houses with native forests. It's a big myth, and I'm so happy to dispel it. We mostly use plantation. So we have every resource and mechanism to solve this issue. So this is a photo in Swifts Creek. That's me, the little figure down there. So I want to talk about what the current Labor government, their current policy is on this issue. So in 2019, the state government finally admitted native forest logging cannot continue. It's unsustainable. But they committed to logging for another 10 years at the time, finally planning to wind up in 2030. Now, the reason why the government chose this 2030 date, or why the 2030 date was announced, or part of the reason, is that it lines up with the expiry of a contract that the government has with Nippon to provide thousands of cubic meters of wood chips to them for peanuts until 2030. So the contract expires naturally on 2030. That's when the government are planning on ending the logging. So 2030 is far too late. And we know how critical these forests are, and I've talked about some of those values, carbon storage, especially given the devastating impacts of the 2019-2020 bushfires, which tore through eastern Victoria and absolutely decimated swathes of forest months after they made this announcement in 2019. So along with the delayed transition, the government also announced an immediate end to all old growth forest logging. As I was saying, this photo, this is an area of old growth forests that was logged after they'd made that announcement just a couple of years ago. And the reason why that's happening is because the government have changed the definition of what old growth forest is. And so they've made it a benchmark which an area of forest can almost never meet. And it's what it means is it's virtually impossible for areas to meet this new criteria and actually qualify for protection. And so old growth forests and forests that were once considered old growth are still being logged today under this new and really misleading classification. So what we know is that all native forests play a critical role and are valuable for a number of reasons. And it's not enough to only protect old growth forests, which have become increasingly fragmented, poorly understood, mismanaged, and just really the words themselves and the definition has just been co-opted by the logging industry as a way to justify ongoing native forest logging. Like, if you don't log old growth forests, then it's fine. But we know this is unacceptable. So all native forest logging needs to end. And it makes me very sad, but every time I hear the words old growth forests, I just, oh. So I hope that no one here ever uses that phrase again. But it's in our minds, it's in our consciousness, because it's kind of the way that we've described it and the way that we've added value to this forest to talk about old growth. But all of the forests are really important. So I've spoken a lot about the facts and figures tonight, and why these forests are so important for protecting us from the impacts of climate change, filtering our water, First Nations justice, threatened species, the list goes on. But I want to bring it back to where the story started for me. And that was my experiences in these forests, which have left the biggest impression on my life. And I'm sure everybody has experienced that at some time, being in a place that they love, being with nature, being with community in nature. Just last weekend, my dad and I, we went hiking on Taungurung country nearby where I'm very lucky to live. People know it as the Cathedral Ranges, or it's Nanathong in Taungurung language. And we just walked all day and we didn't talk. We talked a little bit, but we just listened to the birds and felt the earth under our feet and just looked at the trees. And it was such a beautiful day. And at the end of the day, we couldn't stop saying how good it was. And I remember stories like that from my childhood. People remember the moments that they spend in nature together. And it's so important. And it's something that we don't get to experience all the time because of our lifestyles. We're so busy. We're so disconnected. And these moments in the forest are so special. And I'm sure everyone here, you know, has visited places like Talangi or the Otways or places in Healesville. People have their places that they go to connect. So we can't leave behind a legacy where we take those feelings and those experiences for granted. So the best part of this story is, and it's been pretty depressing so far, but the really hopeful story is that there are a lot of people who are taking action on this issue, trying to save these forests, and people have been doing it for decades. And I'm lucky enough to work with so many of them. Along with a number of tactics to get action on this issue, we're working really hard in the lead up to the state election. We want decision makers and anyone who's getting into government in November, whoever that may be, that they need to be advocating for the immediate protection of native forests from logging. Thank you. I haven't finished, but the woo is good. So we're already leafleting hundreds of households, giving out house signs, talking to communities, talking to people on the streets, and making really as much noise as we can and building as much pressure as we possibly can. Because with enough people power, we absolutely can win on this issue. And we heard the inspiration from Claire. Was Claire? Thank you. Terrible with names. the inspiration from Claire and the stories from Jono and Vic about communities and people power that win these campaigns. And so that is really what we're trying to do. We're trying to build build communities and work together to see native forests finally protected from logging. So please keep in touch. My name's Chris Schuringa. I'm from the Victorian Forest Alliance. We've got a little stall. Our president, Nick Fox, will be sitting there. If people want to have a chat after tonight, I'll be there having a chat. Please come up and have a yarn. And if people are interested in coming out to the forest, and we are kind of keen on running tours, there are people who already run tours, so please let us know if you're interested in coming out to the forest. Together, we can really rewrite this story for our precious native forests. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. I should clarify that it was mentioned a few minutes ago that you have got blank sheets of paper on your seats, which you're invited to write a question on. I'd ask you if you could please put the word gas or forest at the top of your question so that we can easily direct it to the right speaker later. We will get to our Q&A after our next speaker, Freja. The other thing that I'll just take the opportunity to mention is that we will be sending around clipboards so that you can volunteer to help with our events. This one is for the letter dropping and the Vote Climate campaign. So please, if you are able to, put your details down to volunteer for that. And the one last thing is that we will be sending around a petition for the forest. So if you would like to sign that, which I'm sure you will want to, that'll come around during the Q&A. Thank you. Please give a welcome to Freja.
Thank you so much, Ken, and thanks to everybody at Lighter Footprints for welcoming me here tonight. I'd also like to thank Chris for her fantastic work with the forests. As someone who has lived in forests myself, I really appreciate anyone who puts the effort in to saving our last wild spaces. So, hello, welcome to my talk. This is The Last Gasp. My name is Freja Leonard. I'm the No More Gas Campaign Coordinator for Friends of the Earth Melbourne. So we're just going to jog through how and why to get off gas. And that's me looking like a cop standing in front of a Fund Our Future Not Gas banner. So why should we be getting off gas in the first place? Gas is volatile, and I mean volatile in every single way. It's terrible for the climate. It's up to 85 times more climate polluting over a 20-year period than carbon dioxide. One of the things that we have found with this is that we only really know how much gas is leaked from the pipeline system. We don't know how much gas is leaked during production, whether it's onshore or offshore, and we don't know how much gas is leaked behind the meter. So we really don't know exactly how much climate damage is being done by methane. It's polluting at every possible stage. All gas production and processing is polluting. Again, whether it's onshore or offshore. And you really only have to drive past the AGL site at Moorabbin on the PN Highway and see where that big, just before Southland, see where that big chimney is. That land was decommissioned in the late 80s, early 90s, and it still sits empty today. It can't be remediated. It certainly can't be lived upon. Also, anyone who remembers the Longford gas disaster, beef farmers have been told that they're not allowed to eat their own cattle from around Longford. It's just that toxic. Gas in the home creates enormous problems for human health and as well in businesses. It's uneconomic. Gas prices are volatile, and we've all seen this on the East Coast particularly. We're beholden to cartel prices, as well as we have to pay the cost to maintain gas infrastructure. Gas jobs are tanking in the gas industry, and it explodes. It literally explodes. So in every way, gas is ridiculously volatile. So how do we hunt for gas? And I'm going to focus particularly here on offshore, because in Victoria, this is the only place in the world where we have a constitutional ban on fracking, thanks particularly to the work of Friends of the Earth. Yeah. It's no small feat, and a lesser known thing is that when I was working with Lock the Gate in conjunction with Cam Walker from Friends of the Earth and also Tim Baxter, who was working with Climate Council at the time, we all coordinated in our last-ditch 48-hour effort to ensure that acid well stimulation, which is dropping hydrochloric and hydrofluoric acid down a well to dissolve rock and release gas, which was thought to be legal by the state government at the time. We were able to actually have that included in the fracking ban in the Constitution. So you're welcome. And but when we're hunting for gas offshore, it's out of sight and it's out of mind. None of us know that seismic blasting is very bad. It releases a 250 decibel blast of noise. That is louder than the Hiroshima bomb every 10 seconds, 24 hours a day for months and months and months. In over areas covering hundreds, thousands, sometimes millions of hectares of ocean. I'm aware of a proposal at the moment that's on foot, 7.7 million hectares of the Southern Ocean. You see that line here, I'm just gonna, so that little spit of ground, that's King Island, that's the South Australian and Victorian coastline, that's the Tasmanian coastline. All of that area is mooted for seismic blasting. It's going to deafen whales, and a deaf whale is a dead whale. They rely on sonar to communicate, to find food, you know, to breed. Yes, absolutely. This is the migration path of the Kuntapul, Gunda Chamara call it the Kuntapul, the southern right whale. Crayfish can't maintain their, can't maintain their flotation. And so they'll tip upside down, float to the top of the ocean. It kills zooplankton, which is of course the larder of the ocean. So for every reason, just no to it. And NOPTA and NOPSEMA, the federal bodies that oversee the approvals, engage in extremely opaque processes. It's mostly governed at a federal government level, as I said, and have recently, just last week by the federal court, been found to approve licenses in error. And I'll, if I don't run out of time, go into that in a little bit more detail later. So how is it produced? There are a number of different ways that gas wells are put into the ocean. They all look pretty much the same above the water, but it's interesting to look below the water surface and to see the impact. And every single gas well, it doesn't matter what kind they use, has a legacy of toxic leakage. In order to maintain the wellheads, they have to be lubricated and cleaned with hydrochloric acid. There is a constant leakage of methane. There's a cocktail chemical actually contained in gas. We think of it as just methane, but sometimes it's radioactive substances. Sometimes it's a range of different gases, oils, and different kinds of salt. Of course, there's going to be ocean floor disturbance with this. And then at the end of their life, when it comes time to decommission these wells, the decommissioning costs are often not covered by the levies, which are at around 8% of the actual full cost of decommissioning. Routine gas, we're told by a group of experts writing in Frontiers of Environmental Science that routine oil and gas activities will have detrimental environmental effects during each of the main phases of exploration, production, and decommissioning. During the exploration phase, impacts can result from indirect sound and traffic, direct physical anchor chains, drill cuttings, drillings, fluids. Additional direct physical impacts occur in the production phase as pipelines are laid and the volume of discharge produced water increases. So how do we move gas around in Victoria? And this is, I know it's quite an inaccessible map, and it's sort of like it's a map for wonks really, but this gives you some idea of, this is just the high pressure pipelines. These are the main transmission pipelines that move big quantities of gas from production facilities through to various compressor stations. You know, gas is leaking constantly across the extent of the pipeline, so it has to be recompressed periodically along the way. And then where each of those boxes are at Bendigo and Echuca and Shepparton, etc., that's where the gas enters the low pressure main system and carries gas to our homes and businesses. These pipelines, these small mains network pipelines, the ones that travel to our homes, are made from a variety of materials. Some of them are 150 years old. Some of them are made from cast iron and are constantly leaking both gas outward and water inward. Some of them are made from steel, some of them are made from plastic. It's a bit of a dog's breakfast out there. It's a sort of, resources salad that is carrying our gas to our homes. But one thing that they generally have in common is that they all leak to some extent. And across the entire extent of the network, 3.7% of our gas in Victoria, 7.7 petajoules, which is a significant amount, is leaked year on year. It's interesting also to note that our pipeline system is largely foreign owned. So the high pressure system, these big pipes that we're looking at here, they're owned by the APA Group. That's the only Australian company that has ownership of our pipelines. But the small pipes that carry the gas to our homes are owned by 3 foreign-owned companies. That's AGN Group, owned by Chung Kong Infrastructure. It's a publicly listed company based in Hong Kong. They service a little over 500,000 gas connections across Victoria, over 10,000 kilometres of gas pipelines. Multinet Gas, as well, owned by Chung Kong Infrastructure, and then AusNet Services, and they're owned by Singapore Power. So we don't even own the pipes that deliver gas to our homes. Gas use in Victoria. Check out the pigeon singes at Crown Casino. I reckon that's probably about 5% of Victoria's gas use a year right there. I don't know why they still do that. That's amazing anyway. So gas use in Victoria is massive. We use over 1/3 of Australia's domestic gas use. That's 215 petajoules of gas each year on average. Although it is dropping as people are starting to, move away from gas. But currently it's hysterical. We're one of the largest domestic gas users in the world. 60.5% of this goes into our homes and our commercial buildings. 30% is industrial process heating. So that's like manufacturing, canneries, that sort of thing. It's also crematoria. It's not pretty to say so, but it's true. Smelters. 8.5% goes on gas power generation. And then 1%, just 1% is industrial feedstock. So that's chemical use. This is because there's about over 2 million Victorian gas customers, about 2 million are residential, about 65,000 commercial, and only about 600 large industrial plants. But 80% of Victorian households are connected to gas. So the problems with gas and human health are starting to be better understood. And we now recognise that living with gas is like living with a heavy smoker in the household. And it's interesting to note that a lot of public buildings have banned smoking, and rightly so. And I mean, who smokes in the home anymore? And yet the Victorian government continues to subsidise people to install gas appliances in their home. There's a 12% increase in asthma prevalence if you live in a gas-powered home. It's a carcinogenic, it's a hormone disruptive. It's most likely, of course, to impact lower-income homes because lower-income homes are less likely to be able to afford to service their appliances. They may not have functioning range hoods. And also they're going to be using gas at a greater rate because they're quite often not as well insulated. So we know that if you improve ventilation in these homes, that can reduce the risk, but it's not going to entirely remove them. And it's also interesting to note that even when your gas stove is off, I bet you didn't know this, it's constantly leaking methane. So there's unburnt methane constantly being emitted by your gas appliances in your home. But even when the methane is burnt, then it's releasing a chemical cocktail of nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and fine particulate matter. The only safe gas appliance is no gas appliance at all. So the economy, how does it stack up economically? Well, I think we all kind of know the answer to this. Anyone, hands up who has gas in the home? This isn't a judgment call, by the way. I mean, I live in an, A.V. Jennings house from the mid-80s that's gas everything. So I get it. So hands up who is confronted by winter bill shock at the moment, who just got the last bill and went, oh my God. Gas prices have doubled over the last 12 months. Doubled. The prices are set by industry. They will set whatever price they think we can take. And they do that knowing that they're enormously subsidized by the federal government and that around 95% of the profits that they make from our gas bills are walking offshore. So to get some idea of the level of state capture that we have at a federal government level, for the $1.15 million that the fossil fuel industry donated to Coalition and Labor in the last financial year, they received a handsome return of $11.6 billion in federal subsidies. Of that $11.6 billion, $7.3 billion was returned to Australia in royalties. And I'm just going to make sure that I've got my figures right because I can sometimes, and it paid about a little over $7 billion, no, around $6 billion in wages onshore. But from that, they walk away with $115 billion in sales, and bearing in mind that the lion's share of that, around 95%, is walking offshore, and they've paid zero income tax. The lowest tax-paying person in this room paid more tax than the 60 APPIA members in 2020. Just amazing. I would argue that we could take that $11.6 billion, shut down the gas industry and just give it directly to the gas workers, and we'd actually make a tidy profit. Of course, there's the economic consequences for us with our homes and businesses. Non-payment gas disconnections leapt, like nearly doubled between December last year and January this year for residential and small businesses. That's people who have had the gas cut off because they can't afford the bill. And that's in summer when gas use is at its lowest point. Increasingly, we're seeing people are shifting off gas. Now, hands up if you have removed gas from your home or you're in the process of doing it or you're currently in replacement, right? So there we go. Yeah. What that looks like, though, for lower income households, and particularly people like me who, I live in Balam or Frankganistan, as we affectionately call it locally. And it's the people who live at the extent of the gas network who can't afford to fuel switch, who can't afford to replace their big clunky old polluting central heating unit. They are going to be left carrying the can. And they are going to be left paying for the service charge for the upkeep of all of the pipes going through inner urban Melbourne, where people are stampeding away from gas for economic reasons, for health reasons, for climate reasons, maybe all three. And so they're not paying for the cost, the upkeep of the core of the gas network. They're leaving. It means that the people who are left stranded on the network are going to be paying a disproportionately high service charge. Je suis Emma. I also dreamed of fixing my energy inefficient home, but the prices have also stopped me cold. And this is a very, very common case across Victoria right now, and particularly the outer urban areas and rural areas. So what about jobs? Nope, not even in that category is gas winning at all. In fact, it hasn't been since 10 years ago that we've seen jobs in Victoria peak over 2000, and this is also played out at a national level as well. But gas industry jobs have been in steady decline. That's the yellow bar. Look at the green bar. Jobs in renewables, absolutely soaring. The gas extraction industry provides so few direct jobs that, in fact, when the gas industry is talking about jobs, they need to extend to plumbing jobs. They need to talk about manufacturing. But unfortunately, a lot of gas appliance manufacturing has stampeded offshore. And in fact, when at the exact same time that Morrison was using Ream as a poster child for Australian manufacturing, they were in the process of selling off all of their Australian manufacturing and sending it over, sending it offshore. So the jobs just aren't there. But the jobs that are there are worked by people. And we need to make sure that we have a just transition plan to help these people to move from gas-reliant industries to clean, renewable industries, or in some way reskill or accept early retirement packages. We really need to start planning for that now because the gas industry is in a death spiral. What about hydrogen? Schmydrogen. Because it's not ready for full-scale production. It's just not. It might be useful for some small-scale application, but it's incredibly expensive to produce. It requires an enormous amount of land to produce hydrogen, whether you're doing it using coal, gas power, or renewables, you know, coal being brown hydrogen, gas being blue hydrogen, and renewables being green hydrogen, in case anyone's wondered what those terms mean. And it's a much finer gas than methane, so it will leak from the current gas main system. At the moment, there's been talk from APPIA, particularly the Petroleum Industry Association body, that they want to mix between 10 and 20% of hydrogen into the gas main system. But to do that means that we have to upgrade the valves in our appliances, and we'll be having to do that at our own expense. And why would we, when hydrogen has 1/3 the energy density of methane? So you need 3 times as much hydrogen to get bang for your buck compared to methane. So our position is that hydrogen is really just an option of last resort. It can be useful for that 1% of methane that goes into industrial feedstock, and for those 200 plus heavy to shift industries that can't use anything else. So we're advocating a just transition. We want to see no new gas connections statewide. We want to see a plan for subsidised, orderly retirement of the gas transmission networks by 2035. And we want that to start with the furthest out gas customers, the lowest income homes and businesses. We want to make sure that it's means tested so that people can, without being out of pocket, receive thermal efficiency retrofits. That's better insulation, basically. And clean electricity upgrades, so solar panels, home batteries, and 3-phase upgrades so that they can have induction cooktops, for instance. No new gas licenses or developments statewide. I mean, it's great that the Victorian government has stopped forcing people to connect to gas. Thank you. But no new gas connections statewide from now. We need a rapid retirement plan for all current gas facilities and projects. And the way to do this is by installing, and Claire was mentioning this earlier, community and government-owned microgrids. We need a decentralised, nimble energy system. It's the only way to avoid cataclysmic climate change, unacceptable pollution, the associated health impacts, and for us to be able to manage our own energy costs. The only way to do it is to transition to a new renewably powered all-electric energy system. I just want to say now it's not COVID. I just had a really bad cold and I'm still recovering, so I'm not germy though. We need to do this for a number of reasons, but a really strong one is energy security. And as we've seen with, as Ken referenced before, the horrifying Nord gas pipeline rupture, which is about a kilometre of rupture. We see that, or the Longford gas disaster, we see that when something goes wrong, it goes terribly wrong. So accidents will lead to energy blackouts. We've seen the massive storms that took out a lot of the electricity grid and the system vulnerability that's created. We've all experienced the Premier up there saying, please turn off your air conditioning units because we're starting to run out of electricity. And then the ongoing cost of infrastructure maintenance, where, you know, the further you send electricity, the more microns are shed. You can put this many microns into the wires at this point, and the more it travels, the smaller it gets. So by having small, nimble, decentralized energy grids, we're using energy much more efficiently anyway. Renewables are also increasingly secure. More and more people are installing home batteries, and community microgrids are already under trial and proven to work. So many parts of the state and country live without gas. It's good to remember we don't actually need it. We can too. Gas, as I mentioned cheerfully before, is in a death spiral. So, I went away for a week offline. I sort of started to prepare this presentation, and then I came back and all hell had broken loose. I mean, by all hell, I mean in the best possible way. So last week, while I was away, not paying attention to news, Origin announced that they're walking away from fracking 20 to 40 appraisal wells intended to ramp up to 200 to 300 full production wells covering over 30,000 square kilometres on the traditional lands of the Nurralingi people over a 20 to 40 year period. This would release a carbon bomb of up to 1,358 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions. That is 3 times Australia's entire carbon budget for the year ending March 2021. They're selling the rights to Tamboran, and Tamboran intend to bring in a super fracker. It's a huge new machine that fracks harder and deeper than ever before. It sounds like something from a porn movie, but unfortunately, it's all too very real, and it's fracking the country. Fantastic to see the result in the federal court with the Tiwi Islanders. Absolutely amazing. Congratulations to the Manupi clan of the Tiwi Islands, and particularly for their landmark representation of song and dance as evidence. Apparently, while they were singing and dancing, I was in a meeting today where one of the women who's the coordinator of that campaign was talking about while they were singing and dancing, turtles and dolphins were like bouncing out of the ocean, and everybody was so massively impressed. And there was no doubt in anyone's mind at the time that they were going to win the case. And now they have. So this is just absolutely amazing. And it's fantastic to see NOPSEMA called to account for their lack of consultation and for awarding licenses in error and with, giving approvals inadequately. How can we take action? And I wanted to print out this QR code, but unfortunately, I think my printer knows that it's made out of a lot of gas-related products. And every so often it just balks when I'm trying to do particularly gas-related work. So anyway, if Friends of the Earth platform going into this state election comes under the large umbrella of a just transition. So this means no more gas. We want to fast track efforts to make it easier for households, businesses and industry to transition away from fossil gas. No more drilling for gas. No connecting suburbs to the gas network. No flooding gas terminals. No pipelines. No more gas infrastructure, full stop. We want to embrace offshore wind. Get on with assessing new onshore and offshore wind projects, including a fully funded transition plan for early coal closure and maximising manufacturing opportunities for the Latrobe Valley. Friends of the Earth has commissioned research that has found that all of Victoria's coal-fired power stations can close 15 years earlier, and probably will, given the trajectory of coal right now. We want to protect native forests, and yay! And we recognise that Victoria's native forests are a crucial carbon sink, that they sequester a quarter of Victoria's emissions in 2019 to 20. And the Victorian government, absolutely, 2030 is too late. Transition out of native logging now. And finally, sustainable cities. We need rapid, accessible, connected, reliable public transport which services all communities. We need to fill in the PT black spots, and that starts with a better bus network in the western suburbs. And I'll leave it there, but this QR code, I'm happy to leave that up. I've got it on my computer if you want to come and scan it. If you beep on that, you can email the ministers today asking them or telling them that you get behind all of these asks. Thank you so much again for your time. I think I went slightly over time, so I apologise for that. And thank you very much to Lighter Footprints.
Thank you, Freya. What a great insight into the gas issues. Now it's your turn. I'm going to invite Freya and Chris to come up the front in a few seconds. They can come up now. If you're keen, you can come right up. But this is your chance to pass your questions on a sheet of paper to the right-hand end of the row. If you write your questions down, or if you've written your question already, don't forget to have gas or forest at the top of the page. And if you could just pass it down the row, then one of our lovely volunteers, Light of Footprints volunteers, will collect your question and bring it up, and it'll be directed to the appropriate person. Now, don't forget, there's the clipboards. The clipboards are coming around for you to volunteer to help with what we're doing. And if you can please fill out your name on the clipboard if you are able to volunteer, and then thanks, and then pass the clipboard on. Please don't sit on the clipboard. We need to keep those clipboards moving along. And Mitzi, yes, and Mitzi here is going to pass the clipboards around for the gas petition. So they're the green clipboards. If you could sign those for the gas petition. Thank you. So I will just get some questions happening. So keep your questions coming. We won't probably be able to get through all questions, but we'll try and get through. And so now what I'll ask our wonderful presenters to do is to read out the question. So Chris, are you ready to answer one of those? If you could read out the question or summarise it, if it's a long one, and then provide an answer, that would be great.
This was a question that was asked earlier. Why are the pellets not reused? So the pellets that are made out of native forests, they have a lifespan of around 2 to 5 years before they eventually break or have damage done to them, and then they just end up in landfill. And so they are used for a period of time, but then they do eventually break and end up in landfill. And so, yeah, there's plenty of opportunity to either use plantations or soft plastics. So you see those kind of recycled benches and those kind of things made out of, old soft plastics. I think that really is an awesome alternative, and it's totally possible. It's just about giving mills an opportunity to transition and providing money to get mills that are producing pellets away from native forests so that they can be produced in a much more sustainable way, and it's not native forests anymore. I hope that answers the question.
This is a great question, and I'm glad you asked, whoever asked. So it's basically about assisting renters to transition off gas, and what sort of incentives can we provide for landlords. So one of the reasons that we're advocating for a means-tested subsidy system to help households transition is because then it doesn't matter what the basically if you're a low-income renter, you're eligible for potentially 100% of the upgrade, full insulation upgrade, solar installation, and appliance switching. And what landlord would say no to free stuff for their house, basically? So that's one way of sidestepping the rental issue, and that's the one that we're advocating. The Victorian government has had there are some incentives for landlords to do it. At the moment, a landlord has to have a very compelling reason to say no to certain upgrade projects, including some fuel switching projects. So the Victorian government is sort of taking a very, very small stick to it, but we're really wanting to dangle an enormous carrot, basically.
Two people asked about the WA state Labor government's plan to transition away from native forest logging in, I think it's 2024. So they made the announcement last year. So doing a 2-3 year transition. So the key strategies that led to that success were a few things. There was a wonderful campaign that was run there for many years by the WA Forest Alliance, Western Australian Forest Alliance. And a few of the key things that they did, they produced this really wonderful film, which was called The Cry of the Forest. Some people might have seen it, which they just rolled out across Western Australia. And it really brought to the public's attention the issue of native forest logging and what they were doing to protect those areas. And I think as well, they ran a really great public campaign where, again, they showed and explained the impacts of the industry, but the positive alternatives as well. And there was some unlikely voices that really came out speaking out against the logging. So that the apiary business in WA is really quite an important sector, and it relies on those forests for pollination, for the bees. And so the apiary sector actually came out against the logging, which was a big catalyst as well when you have unusual voices and people in communities kind of coming out saying, and also the fact that the industry was in decline for many years. And so the WA Labor government made a really ambitious transition plan. There is absolutely no reason why Victoria shouldn't follow that or can't follow that. A 2-year transition is perfectly reasonable for solving this issue. So I think there's some of the successes and what we can kind of learn from their campaign to apply here as well.
This is one of my favorite questions. So basically it's around the minerals that are going to be required for renewables. And it's a really, really good question. It's complex. I can, bloody go for half an hour on this one, but I won't. But it is this a situation of which evil do we choose? Well, kind of yes, so it all does require minerals at this stage. However, there's sudden uprush in innovations. So there's salt batteries now starting to be produced. There's pumped hydro, has just been announced by the Queensland government this morning, a massive pumped hydro system. So there is innovation starting to take place, and hopefully that continues to pick up. Also, solar panels are becoming more efficient. But one of the things that we really advocate for is maximizing thermal efficiency. We don't know how much energy we need until we know how much energy we don't need. And we need to make sure that we're using only the energy that we absolutely need to. So, I mean, there's a whole thesis in that. So I'll just try to keep it very brief. But another thing that we need to make sure that we start really doing in Australia and around the world is comprehensive renewables recycling. We need a closed loop system for renewables. We need to make sure that nothing is going to landfill. It's all looping back into being reused to the greatest possible extent. And honestly, we should have been doing that with everything forever anyway.
This is a really good question. Do you have any comments regarding ongoing conservation of native forests, given more than 150 years of degradation and biodiversity loss? Yeah, there's so much opportunity in conservation and regeneration jobs across Victoria to address the impacts of native forest logging historically, and yeah, the legacy of biodiversity loss and degradation of forests. And last year, a bunch of environment groups came together to release a report which was called After the Logging, which looked at the rate of regeneration that was happening in native forests after logging. And it found that in the mountain ash forest that I was talking about earlier, around 1 in 3 areas fail to regrow after logging. So that means that they just are left as basically weedy paddocks. And so it's a legal requirement for the government to regenerate those areas after logging, but what's happening is that's not actually occurring. And so there's a massive job regenerating these areas. And it's a really important job as well for traditional owners who are in these areas, and there's plenty of cultural ranger programs and so much work that can be done with First Nations people to offer jobs on country, which is just such an amazing opportunity and way that we can correct the kind of direction that we've gone in and have a positive story out of this issue.
Oh, that's mad. I didn't know that. That's sobering as heck. Okay. Someone who renovated recently having absolutely no gas, but the gas company won't remove the base from our property. Does this leak gas? Possibly. I mean, you know, I don't know, and we don't know. And this is one of the things, is that there's absolutely no real-time monitoring of the fugitive emissions, leakage of gas. So I don't really know. To actually find out requires having a really, really expensive camera called a flow camera, and that will take photographs of methane leaking. Otherwise, you don't really know. Well, we can, yeah, we can have that conversation directly. Great, excellent. Well, so am I. So we can.
We've only got about 2 minutes.
Okay.
If we can get through a few more questions, that would be great for the people who've asked.
What proportion of the current pulp timber industry in Victoria native forests is plantation based? It's about 85%. So it's mostly a plantation based industry. Only really a small amount of proportion of our wood and pulp products are actually from native forests. It's mostly plantation. So as I said, we export our plantations overseas, and so that other 15%, which is native forest, can easily be met with those existing plantations. Yeah, so it's mostly the timber industry. The future of the timber industry is in plantations. It's where all the jobs are currently, apart from the few that are still in native forest logging.
How does one transition from gas-fired hydronic heating installed about 15 years ago when gas was the preferred option? Well, the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program does actually provide opportunity for people to upgrade their old appliances with newer efficient appliances. But unfortunately, if you have an old gas appliance, they're going to upgrade it with a new efficient gas appliance. And that's going to be the case until the end of next year. So if I have my way, and we're just about to release at Friends of the Earth, we're just about to release our own response to the Victorian Gas Substitution Roadmap called the Community Gas Retirement Roadmap. We have a series of recommendations, including, can you please just bloody stop providing subsidised gas appliances today, and help people who installed their gas-fired hydronic heating circa 15 years ago when gas was the preferred option to switch to clean, efficient, renewable energy. But it's also worth noting as well that if you have a split system air conditioner, that's also a heater, and it's a little known fact. So if you do actually have that facility in your home, use that instead, and you'll find that it's way more economic and every bit as effective, and just don't use the hydronic heating at all.
How is the Victorian Forest Alliance working with bodies such as Victorian National Parks Association, Strength in uniting various lobby groups, and big writing trees? Yes. We do work with the Victorian National Parks Association and other organisations like Wilderness Society, Environment Victoria. We have a fantastic relationship with FO, and also our members, just to talk a little bit about our members and who makes up the Victorian Forest Alliance. There's Goongeroo Environment Centre, which are out in East Gippsland, Environment East Gippsland, Kinglake Friends of the Forest. Rosie at the table there, she's from Kinglake Friends of the Forest. If you want to talk about King Lake, which is so close to Melbourne, Warburton Environment, Wombat Forest Care, which has been operating for 20 years, I think. The whole idea of the Alliance is to really bring together all of these community groups and have a really united front to tackle this issue, because we know that when we work together, that's where we get results. And it's been pretty amazing just collaborating, strategizing together, and it's just been fantastic working with all of the different community groups from across Victoria. And we do have the Combat Forest is probably 8 hours away from the group that's in Far East Gippsland. So we have the tyranny of distance, but yeah, lots of Zoom meetings.
I've got, do we have sufficient renewable energy sources to move away from gas? No. And if not, by when? Don't know. It's a matter of political will and again, exhausting efficiency options. But that's yeah. There's a much longer conversation that can be had about any of these questions. But it's a really good question. I wish the answer were yes. We are rapidly moving towards. There's this, like, Australia has the fastest uptake of renewables in the world right now. So it's hard to know when, because it's an exponential curve. So it's very difficult to chart how it's going to go. If it continues at the current rate, and then quite possibly, you know, within the decade, we could achieve that, which is critical because this is the critical decade for climate change. So hopefully yes, but I don't really know.
No, these are quite in depth.
Okay, no, that's fine. Well, look, you've done very well. Look, I've got just a couple of here that people have been pressing about. I'll see if we can get you to give a quick response to these. One is, what do you say about renewables being destructive to the environment, such as solar panels manufacturing, electric cars, cars using coal or gas to be made? Any thoughts on that?
Well, again, this is where we really need to have a closed loop system for renewables. If we're, I actually want to get into the ear of Twiggy Forrest and say, hey, man, you're every guy. You're the dude who likes to own all of the minerals. Why don't you become the king of renewables recycling? If you own that, you can export the IP and make all the money, and you continue to own the minerals even after you've sold them. It's like a sausage on a string. You know, you sell someone the hot dog and then you yoink the sausage out of the hot dog and then you sell them the hot dog again. So that's one solution to that. It's quite complex, but I can try to give a simple answer.
This one I think is relevant given the election that's coming up. Should we campaign directly for Nippon Paper to end their contract early for supply of chips from native forests?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Nippon, who are the company, and then Opal are the company that produces the cardboard and packaging products. So yeah, absolutely appealing to them. It's weird. I've tried to get an email address for the people from Opal for a long time, and the website is just, it's like a wall. So if people actually find a contact for them and get in touch, that would be great. I would love to know.
Okay. And in continuing that theme about the upcoming election, has the state government halted the vilification and litigation against activists trying to halt the destruction of native forests?
No, no, sadly.
Sadly not.
Yeah, so the laws that passed, I think it was a couple of months ago, which mean forest activists are up to $21,000 fines or 12 months in jail for protesting against native forest logging. Those laws are set to go into effect in May, at a time when we desperately need people standing up, communities standing up for forests. Yeah, the government is planning on penalising everyday people from taking action. It's pretty scary. Yeah.
All right, last couple of hopefully quick questions as we finish up. Just on gas, how do individual households on limited income decommission from gas to electricity without government support? Given that appliances may be okay, maybe on gas in the home with relatively new boilers or heaters and cookers and new gas pipelines put throughout the local area, where do you recommend the householders turn?
Without government subsidies, it's going to be very hard. And this is why we're advocating for heavily means tested full subsidies for lowest income, you know, escalating up to, once you've got to a certain point of wealth, stuff that you can do it yourself, you know, and in fact, those people already are. So without subsidies, it is a really difficult proposition. And I find myself in, our central heating unit died at the beginning of winter. And I went onto Facebook Marketplace and got a couple of little electric blow heaters. And, you know, we've always been wearers of jumpers and, you know, like put on the extra blanket, wear the thick fluffy socks people. But I also went to IKEA and bought one of those little stove top, like one of those little single induction cooktops and have been mostly cooking on that. But 75% of the gas that we use in our homes is in heating. So, so heating is the big prospect, and government really needs to step up and help out.
Right, thanks, Fred. And last question, given the election, I think this question might be of interest. What specific policies could an independent community candidate for the November state election hold to reduce environmental harm and appeal to the urban electorate, gas or forest?
Advocating for an immediate end to native forest logging, or at least 2024. Yeah, that would. I think if there's if our decision makers in Parliament advocating for those things, better laws for threatened species, a just transition for workers in the native forest logging industry, yeah, all really good things.
Final word from Freya.
That list right there, basically. And no new gas infrastructure, exploration, production, a rapid retirement of the gas transmission network, and full government subsidies to assist households in doing that. And if we're wondering where the money is coming from, well, the money is absolutely pouring out to industry in the biggest possible way, mostly at a federal government level. But that money can be allocated by Infrastructure Australia to Victoria to help us transition.
Great. Well, thank you very much, ladies. That's been wonderful. Now, if I can get some now, this has been the Great Forest book. It's not the Eucharist. Because that will be taking calls from Newcastle. So I hope that we love that book. We hope you will too. And Chris, I hope you'll like our carbon neutral wine. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, so I know everybody's been sitting for a long time and you probably want to get up and get home. But at the end of our meetings, we do our Lighter Footprints business. So I'd really appreciate it if you could hang for the next couple of minutes. Jenny Smithers over there. Jenny Smithers. She can't hear me. I was going to try and get her to stop talking. Okay. We have a state election. I think we all know that. And at Lighter Footprints, we're going to be campaigning primarily in the seats of Hawthorne and Kew, although we will also be working in Malvern and Ashwood. We are in marginal seats. I mean, it's a surprise to be here. It was a surprise win in May for the Teal Independent. It was a great win. But we now are in a situation where we have both Hawthorne being marginal, and in my view, Kew is also marginal. Tonight, we do have with us the independent candidate for Kew, Sophie Turney. So Sophie, would you mind standing up and just saying hello? Great. Thanks very much. Thanks for coming, Sophie. And over at the forest table, if you could tap Nick on the shoulder, Nick Savage. Nick, this guy there, Nick Savage. Hi, we're introducing you to the audience. This is Nick Savage. He is the Greens candidate for Hawthorne. So you'll be seeing more of him. So we've been meeting with the candidates in the state election, along with our friends at the Kooyong Climate Change Alliance. And we've been talking to them about what we think good policy looks like. And there is a slide. There it is. So you can have a read of that. A lot of it's what we've been talking about tonight. Victoria to achieve net zero by 2035. Clear plan to end the use of gas in Victoria. no new gas exploration, shut down coal by 2030, a target for the uptake of EVs, and end native forest logging as soon as possible and well before 2030. So it's a great list, and it's a list that we want to be out there talking to our community about. So we've had a great night tonight of acquiring a lot of information, and we want to take that to the streets. We want to be talking to our community. We're doing Saturday morning conversations. We're going to be working with the KCCA on a candidate scorecard. We're going to be running 2 candidate forums, one in Hawthorne and one in Kew, and all of that takes effort and time from all of us really to make that happen. So I wanted to alert you to the fact that we're going to be having a campaign launch here on the 12th of October. You've probably you may have been to one of our campaign launches before. They're a lot of fun. And we do try to sign you up to do stuff like hand out scorecards at pre-poll and polling day and put a sign on your front fence. So I'm hoping that you all come along to that event. We'll have some great speakers for you and lots of opportunity for you to get to kind of know each other a bit more. I mentioned the campaign, the candidate forums on the agendas that were on your seats. There are QR codes for you to RSVP to those events. So if you're interested in coming, that would be great. John O'Lanuz from Environment Victoria is going to be speaking at those forums as well as the candidates. You'll get a chance to hear them talk about their climate policies, and you'll get a chance to ask them questions. The last thing I'm going to talk about is an event that we've got on the 6th of October, which is about what we've been talking about tonight. It's about getting off gas at home. This is a Zoom event. Richard Keach, who is an engineer and an energy consultant, is going to be talking to us about how you get off gas at home. And there's going to be lots of opportunity for questions, because I think people have lots of questions about how they go about the process and what's the best way to go. The last thing I want to say is, at the campaign launch, you'll have an opportunity to sign up to lots of activities, which we hope you'll be part of. But we also think that there are many people in this room who could and might want to join us in organizing these events and these campaigns. So if you're interested in taking a step up and becoming a bit more involved in how we do the stuff that we do, please do come and talk to me, because there's lots of opportunities to be involved. And lastly, before I forget, we letterboxed 10,000 households over the long weekend with flyers about forests and gas, giving out information. So I want to thank everybody in this room who got out there and did that. They're all on recycled paper. So well done, everybody. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the evening.